Hello everyone. Today we will discuss book 3rd of Social Contract written by Rousseau. So for chapter 1, Government in General, he describes the free act which has two causes, that is one moral and the other physical. Moral is of mind corporation, and the physical one is our body corporation, and he describes in the form of government that legislative powers are our mind and executive power are our body. So we need legislative power corporations to executive powers, and then only the government will work or any free act will happen. Then he says what is a government. He describes an intermediate body established between subjects and sovereign for their mutual intercourse, charged with the execution of the laws and the maintenance of liberty, civil as well as political. So he says the government is an intermediate body. Like there is subjects and there are sovereign. So in between them there is government for the mutual understanding and mutual intercourse for any matter. Then he says the members of this body are called magistrates or kings, that is governors, and the entire body is called the prince. So by combining sovereign, government and subjects, we have the prince, and the members of government are kings or magistrates, or which are called governors. So then he says it is absolutely only a commission in which, as simple officers of the sovereign, they exercise in his name the power of which he has made them the depository, and which he can limit, modify and take away when he wishes. So he says the government is a commission which is basically made by subjects, and they have given their power to the sovereign, and they can take them away whenever they want. They can limit it, they can modify it whenever they want. So the government or supreme administration is the legitimate exercise of executive power, and the prince or magistrate is the man or body charged with this administration. Then there is so he says the government and so the government, sovereign and citizens, subjects, they all need to function properly for the best government, for the whole prince to work properly. They all need to do their work accordingly. So he says these situations where despotism or anarchy will continue, that is, sovereign desires to govern, magistrate wishes to give laws, subjects refuse to obey. So then at that time, in these three situations, disorder succeeds. So will the despotism or anarchy will continue. So he says subjects needs to obey, magistrate work is to govern, and sovereign work is to give laws. So if any of these three doesn't do their work accordingly, or have another wishes, the disorder will succeed. Then he says large number of population exceeds to people, citizen having less liberty, respectively less liberty than the less number of population state. So it means there should be different governments forms for different situations and places. He says when there is large number of population, and there is less number large number of population exceeds to people, citizen having the less liberty, respectively less liberty than the less number of population. So he is basically saying if there are 10 people, 100 citizens, and so they will have more share than the thousand citizens in our country. So he is saying if there is 100 people in a country and 1000 people in a country, they will have different share in the government. So they both need different types of government which can be followed by them and which is good for them. Then then he talks about government changing with the change in population. He is justifying that different forms are necessary and different forms are necessary in different types of population, and there is a need of changing governments with time, as one form of government cannot continue till another time, and there is a need to change the governments with time. Then he tells then he describes two sovereigns, that is one de jure and de facto. He only tells about them. Then at the last of this chapter he says, for often the government which is best in itself becomes the most vicious if its relations are not changed in accordance with the faults of the political body to which it belongs. So he is saying the government which was once the best form can also become the worst form if it is not changed according to the time and according to the political body. He says assemblies, councils, power to deliberate, to resolve rights, titles, privilege, which exclusively belong to the prince. So this is the end of chapter 1. So in chapter 2, the principle which constitutes the different forms of government, he describes 3 forms of will. That is, first individual will, second common will, and third general will. So in individual will, he says that is particularly advantage, like for a person's advantage, and for common will he says the advantage of the prince, government, and the will of the body, and for general will he says the will of the sovereign, the will of the people. Then he says in a perfect legislation the particular or individual will should be null, the will of the body of the government quite subordinate, and consequently the general or sovereign will is dominant and the only rule for all the others. So according to the natural order, on the contrary, the different wills will become active in proportion as they concentrate. Thus the general will is always weakest, the will of the body of the government has the second rank, and the individual will is the first of all. So that in the government each member is first himself, then magistrate, then citizen, a gradation directly opposed to the required by social order. So he is saying how things should go is first general will, then common will, and then private or individual will. And how things are going is first individual will, then common will, and then general will. So he is saying the more the people are, the more the people will not participate. He is directly contradicting to the population that if the population is higher, then people are less likely to participate in the government, and if the people are less, then people will surely participate and will be the active citizen in the government. Then he says it is certain that the progress of affairs becomes slower in proportion as the number of people engaged in them becomes greater. Then he says that the larger the state becomes, the more restricted should the government be, so that the number of chiefs should diminish in the ratio of the increase of the people. He is directly opposing that population should not be higher, and if the people are very much, the people are greater in number, then the government should take more control of the people, and according to the less number of people. If people are less, then government should be liberal, and if people are more, then government should restrict them. Then he says the art of the legislator is to know how to fix the point where the force and will of the government, which are always in reciprocal proportions, combine in the relation most advantageous to the state. Okay. So in chapter 3, that is division of governments, he describes three types of government, that is democracy, aristocracy, and monarchy. So he says democracy is for the small number of people, and aristocracy is for the medium form, and monarchy is for large number. So he says inverse proportionally, that larger the citizens are, the less the people should be in the government. Uh, in Then in chapter 4, that is democracy, he describes democracy, that is democracy should have a very should be a very small in size, and have simple order, and have equality and no luxury. He says that there is no government so subject to civil wars and internal agitations as democratic or popular government, because there is no other which tends to strongly and so continuously to change its form. If there were a people of gods, its government would be democratic. So perfect a government is not suitable for men. So he says democracy is a very perfect form of government, which is not suitable for human being. He is actually being very realistic. That democracy is actually a very ideal form of government, which cannot be achieved, and uh, which cannot be achieved in its pure form. Uh, but we can actually achieve democracy in its not very pure form, but somewhat related to democracy, which we are following right now. So he says that democracy is very perfect, that it cannot be achieved, or it is not suitable for men living right now. Then in chapter 5 he describes aristocracy, that is uh, the government and the sovereign, and consequently two general wills, one relating to all the citizens and the other relating only to the administration. Then he says the first societies governed themselves aristocratically. The chiefs of families deliberated among themselves concerning public affairs. Young people yielded without difficulty to the authority of experience. From this we have the names priests, elders, senate, and the geronts. So he says there are three kinds of aristocracy, that is natural, elective, and hereditary. The third is the worst of all governments. The second is the best. Second one was elective, and the third, that was hereditary, was the worst. The second is the best. It is an aristocracy in the true sense of the word. Then he says, um, for if for in the popular government all citizens are born magistrates, but this government limits them to a small number, and they become magistrates only by election, by which means probity, enlightenment, experience, and all the other reasons for preference and public esteem are so many guarantees that the government will be wisely administered. Then, in one word, it is the best and most natural order, that the wisest government, the multitude. Then he says a state must be neither so small nor a people so simple and upright that the execution of the laws follows immediately upon the public will, as in a good democracy. He says allows certain inequality, that some people should be given preferences who can give their time to it. He says if this form allows a certain inequality of fortune, it is in order that in general the administration of public affairs may be confined to those who can best give all their time to it, not as Aristotle asserts that the rich may always have the preference. On the contrary, it is necessary that an opposite choice sometimes teach the people that there are in the merits of men reasons for preference which are more important than riches. He says reason, that is a quality to think or to contradict on your thinking. He says somewhat inequality is okay if you want to confine or concentrate the number of people to govern, to be in the administration, that that some people have the quality to reason, and he also critiqued the Aristotle, that Aristotle have given the preferences to the richest to govern the people, and he says we should not give preference to rich, but to them who have reason, who have time to give to the government, and have that quality to govern. So he says we can justify somewhat inequality, but it should be for the administration and for people govern who can govern very nicely and for the best form of the government. Then he describes monarchy, that is the power which comes from the love of people is undoubtedly great, but it will always be precarious and conditional. Princes will never be satisfied with it. The best of kings wish to be victor if pleases them to be so, without ceasing to the masters. A political sermonizer might tell them in vain that the force of people being their strength, their greatest interest lies in the prosperity of people and in its number and bravery. They know well that it is not true. Their personal interest demands first that the people be weak, miserable, and never able to resist them. Monarchy is suitable only for great states. And he says an essential and inevitable fault which will always place a monarchical government below the republican is that in the latter the public voice seldom raises to high places any but enlightened and capable men who fill them with honor, whereas those who will them under monarchs are often but blunderers, rascals, and intriguers whose small talents which at court help them to high places, serve only to show their unfitness as soon as they have reached them. The people is less liable to be deceived in a choice than the prince, and a man of real merit is almost as rare in a ministry as is a fool at the head of a republican government. So he says there are different kinds of people. There are blunderers, rascals, and intriguers whose small talents, which at court help them to high places, serve only to show their unfitness as soon as they have reached them. So there are very low chances of people with great qualities to achieve those to achieve a very high level in a monarchy. So he says if a rascal or if a intriguer blunderers will please the monarch, they will reach a very high level. And if the person who have great qualities, who doesn't please the monarch, will never reach the level they deserve. So this is the only problem with the monarchy. He says it is easier to conquer than to reign. He says when we conquer a state, we are just fighting for it and we will conquer it, but it is very difficult to rule that state, to uh, rule the state accordingly, to rule the people there. It is very difficult to do it, but to conquer it is very easy in respect to rule it. Then he says the greatest inconvenience in the government of one person is the lack of that continuous succession, which is the other two forms in uninterrupted connection. One king being dead, there must be another. Elections leave dangerous intervals. They are stormy, and unless the citizens are of disinterestedness and integrity, which accords ill with this form of government, intrigue and corruption will arise. He says if just like if a king dies, then the seat is vacant, so there is a need of election, but there can't be election because it is a monarchical form. So the king's vacant place will be taken by people who are corrupted, and the corruption will continue. So he says it is unusual if he to whom the state has sold itself does not sell in it in his turn and indemnify himself upon the weak for the money extorted from him by the strong. Sooner or later, everything becomes venal under such an administration, and peace, thus enjoyed under the kings, is worse than the disorders of an interregnum. To prevent those evils of not having the ruler and had to do the election, they have made hereditary and accepted the risk of having a child, monster, or an imbecile as chief over a good king. He says to prevent those things that there are no elections. They have choose the hereditary. So the thing that is that a child, monster, or an imbecile can govern us, but a good king can't. He's actually being sarcastic with it. He's saying they have chosen the path of hereditary because they didn't wanted the risk of having a good king. Here, so to prevent those evils of not of leaving the seat vacant, they have chosen the hereditary. So it is said that much trouble is taken to teach young princes the art of reigning. He says there is a very trouble of teaching young prince of art of ruling, and it would be better to begin by teaching them art of obedience. He says when we are teaching a young person, a young prince, the art of ruling, first we should teach them the art of obedience. First they should understand what is to obey, what is the situation of subjects. They should understand that first, then understand what is ruling. It is a science which is never possessed to less degree than after it has been learned, and it is learned better in obeying than in commanding. So when we command something, we don't understand the situation of that person. So we first have to understand the situation of that person, then we can give the commands accordingly. Then he says, if there is more stratagem in a court, there is more wisdom in a senate, and that republics gain their ends by methods which are more constant and better carried out. He says, we know that we must endure a bad government if we have it. The question is to find a good one. He says, we can always endure a bad government, but we have to find a good one. Then he talks about mixed governments, that is, there is no simple government. A single chief must have subordinate magistrates. A popular government must have a chief. So in the division of executive power, there is always a gradation from the greater number to the lesser, with this difference that now the large number depends upon the small, and now the small upon the large. Sometimes there is an equal division, either when the constituent parts are in a mutual dependence, as in the government of England, or when the authority of each part is independent but imperfect, as in Poland. This last form is bad because there is no unity in the government and the state lacks cohesion. He says the large number of people should be governed by a small number of people, and the large number of people should be governed by a small number of people. So, and he says if there is an equal division, the things won't work accordingly, and is the and which leaks unity in the government, and the state lacks cohesion. Then she says, which is better, a simple government or a mixed government? The question is much agitated among politicians, and to it the same response should be made as I have given before as to any form of government. He says, in first case, the government is divided in order to weaken it, and in the second, to reinforce it. For the maximum of force and of weakness is found in simple governments, whereas the mixed forms give a medium of force. So in this chapter, he's basically saying in first case that was that a small number of people, the small number of people should be governed by large number of people, and the large number of people should be governed by small number of people. The government is divided in order to weaken it, and in second to reinforce it for the maximum of force. So he's saying the government is divided because we need to weaken it because people are less in number, and in second we need to reinforce it because people are very much in number. Then in chapter 8 he says that all forms of government are not proper in every country. In all the governments of world, the public personality consumes but produces nothing from the labor of its members, from which it follows that a civil state can exist only as long as the labor of man returns more than enough for his needs. So he is saying in all the governments that when people gets how much they are producing, they are happy. If they won't get that much that they are producing, they won't be happy. So basically we need different types of government, and according to their climate, according to their conditions, and according to their economic and geographical area, we need different types of government. So then he says people is always rich and the finances are always in a good condition. This come back again. So I will read this out. All governments are not of the same nature. They are more or less grasping, and the differences are founded upon that the other principle, that the further public contributions are removed from their source, the more onerous they become. This burden cannot be measured by the amount of the imposed, but by the road which they have to travel to return into the hands from which they came. When this circulation is prompt and well established, it makes no difference whether the individual pays much or little. The people is always rich and the finances are always in good condition. He said when they give their, so he's giving example by the road which they have to travel to return into the hands from which they came. He's saying how much they have given to the government, they must get that much back, and they won't have any problem after it to pay much or to pay little. They will always be rich, and the finances will always be in a good condition. If this situation does not evolve right in a good condition, the problem will arise. So he says on the contrary, however little the people gives, when the little does not come back again, in giving always it soon becomes exhausted. The state is never rich and the people is always poor. He is saying it follows from this that the more the distance between government and people increases, the more onerous becomes the tributes. In a democracy, the people is lightly taxed. In an aristocracy, the tax is heavier. In a monarchy, it is heaviest of all. A monarchy is suited then only to appealing nations, and an aristocracy to the medium in wealth, as in magnificence. A democracy to small and poor states. Ungrateful, sterile soils where the product is not worth the labor should remain uncultivated and desert, or be peopled only by savages. Places where the labor of man retains only the necessities of life should be inhabited by the Barians. Polity would be impossible there. The places where the excess of production over labor is mediocre should belong to free peoples. Those where the soil fertile and abundant gives a large production for little labor should be governed by a monarchy. And he says the effects of climate, the despotism, absolute power belongs to the warm countries, and barbarism to the cold, and good polity to the intermediate regions. Barbarism is absence of culture and civilization is for the cold region, and despotism, that is absolute power, for the warm regions, and good polity to the intermediate regions, which are not neither very cold nor very warm. Then he says where more strength is needed to give the same yield, the surplus must necessarily be less. He says where strength is needed to give the same yield, the excess of production must necessarily be less. Then he says every country has different climate and has different lifestyle with different quality types of food, with different cultivation, and some eat more and less with different populations. So all forms of government are not proper in every country. Says government's force increases with distance like that of lever. Government is not influenced by people as he is not around of it. The force of the people on the contrary is the greatest when concentrated. It evaporates and it is lost in spreading over any great territory as powder when scattered upon the ground takes fire grain by grain. So for chapter 9, that is signs of a good government, he says what are the signs of a good government. He says it is not answered because each wishes to answer it in his own way. Subjects want public tranquility, that is peaceful and calm state. Citizens individual liberty. One prefers the safety of property and the other that of a person. One thinks that the best government is the most severe, the other maintains that it is the most gentle. This one wishes that crimes be punished, and that one that they be prevented. One finds it delightful to be feared by his neighbors, another prefers to be unknown to them. One is content when money circulates, another requires that the people have bread. He says the government under which without outside means, without naturalization, without colonies, the citizens increase and multiply most, is invariably the best. That under which a people diminishes and perishes is the worst. Citizens, it is how now your affair count, measure, and compare. So he is saying the things being equal, everything is like depends on what the citizens wish to see in a government, but some things are permanent. That is without outside means, without naturalization, without colonies, that citizens increase and multiply most. So these things that without outside means, without colonies, without naturalization, these three things are necessary in a good form of government. And uh, where these things are not, these three things are not, the people diminishes and perishes is the worst. So for chapter 10th, the abuse of government and its tendency to degenerate, there are two general ways of by which a government degenerates. That is to wit, when it contracts itself or when the state dissolves. To wit is to intelligence, and when it contracts itself or when the state dissolves. The government contracts when it passes from a small to from a great to a small number. That is today from democracy to an aristocracy, and from an aristocracy to a royalty. Then he says the dissolution of a state may occur in two ways. That is, first, when the prince is no longer administers the state in accordance with the law, and when he usurps the sovereign power. Usurps is take the power illegally. Then a remarkable change that take place. The state, not the government, contracts. I mean that the great state dies, and within it, it is formed another, composed only by the members of the government, which is nothing to the rest of the people but its master and its servant. Then he says when the members of the government usurp separately the power which they should exercise only as a body. As many princes as magistrates, and the state no less divided, then the government perishes or changes its form. And he says when the state dissolves, the abuse of government, whatever it is, takes the common name of anarchy. The democracy degenerates into a ochlocracy, and aristocracy into an oligarchy. He talks about the worst form of the government, that is first anarchy, second is democracy to ochlocracy, aristocracy to oligarchy, and royalty to the tyranny. In the vulgar sense, a tyrant is a king who governs with violence and without regard to justice and the law. In the precise sense, a tenant is an individual who arrogates royal authority without having a right to it. He says Greeks use the word tenant. They give it indifferently to good or bad princes whose authority was not legitimate. So tyrant and usurper are perfectly synonymous words. He says, I call tyrant the usurper of royal authority and despot the usurper of sovereign power. The tyrant is he who creeps in against the law to govern according to it. The despot is who places himself above the law. Even the tyrant may not be a despot, but the despot is always a tyrant. He says, the tyrant is he who creeps in against the law to govern according to it. So the tyrant is someone who is going into the law and changing the law according to him. And the despot is he is who is thinking of himself as above the law. So he is saying that tyrant may be a despot. The tyrant can be a despot, but despot is always a tyrant. Then he is in chapter 11, the death of the political body. The body politic, like the body of man, begins to die from its birth and carries within himself the causes of destruction. He says the government has the qualities or the conditions by which it dissolves one day. He's saying the body politic, like the body of man, begins to die from its birth and carries within himself the causes of its destruction. The constitution of man is the work of nature, that of the state is the work of the art. He says legislative power is in the heart of a state and the executive power is its brain, which becomes motion to all parts. The brain may be paralyzed and the individual still live. A man may be imbecile and live, but as soon as the heart ceases its function, the animal is dead. Then he says the state does not exist by its laws, but by legislative power. The law of yesterday does not oblige to today. So he is saying the power the state have, that is legislative power. The power to make laws is the exact power, but the laws that the government once made should be changed accordingly with time. Why then are all old laws so much respected? He says we must believe that it is only their excellence which has preserved them so long. But they need to change with time. Whereas wherever laws weaken as they grow old, it proves that there is no longer a legislative power and that the state is dead. He says if the law made in ancient times still continues today and which is not governing the body completely or nicely, it is said that the state is dead and the state has no longer the legislative powers or to change the law. Then in chapter 12 he says how sovereign authority is maintained, that is the sovereign having no other force than legislative power acts only through the laws, and laws being but authentic acts of the general will. The sovereign cannot act except when the people is assembled. The people assembled, what a chimera, hoped but is illusory. It is chimera today, but it was not so thousands years ago. Has mankind changed its nature? No. The bounds of the possible in moral things are less narrow than we think. It is our weaknesses, our vices, our prejudices which contract them. Base minds do not believe in great men, while slaves smile with a mocking air at the word liberty. Then in last chapter he describes means of preventing assumptions of government. That is, from these explanation it follows in confirmation of chapter 16 that the act which constitutes the government is not a contract but a law. That the depositories of executive power are not masters of the people but its offices. That it may establish them and dispense with them when it pleases. That it is not a question of contract for them but of obedience. That in assuming the functions imposed upon them by the state, they perform only their duty as citizens without having in any way the right to dispute the conditions. When it happens, then the people institutes an hereditary government, whether it be monarchical in a family or aristocratic in a order of citizens. It is not an engagement that it makes, it is provisional form which it gives to the administration until it pleases to order otherwise. It is true that these changes are always dangerous, and that the established government should never be touched except when it becomes incompatible with the public good. But this circumspection is a principle of politics and not a rule of law. And the state is no more bound to leave the civil authority to its chiefs than the military authority to its generals. So he says the decemvirs, in like manner, having been first elected for a year, tried to retain their power in perpetuity by not allowing the meetings of the people, and by these easy means any government of the world, being once clothed with the public force, sooner or later usurps the sovereign authority. So, uh, in the book third of social contract, he describes what is government, what are the wills, and what are the problems in a government, and what should be the types of government suited for every uh, suited for every population, and what are the problems in a government by which the government dissolve. And basically the idea of this book was, what is government, how should it be governed, and what should be the changes made with the time, and at last what are the problems of government. So thank you.